Hi BookTube, my name is Juan. I am just one reader, and today I am continuing on with my series of recommending. So I have a series here on my channel which I call recommending, in which for each video I choose a particular category of books. It's not necessarily a genre or a style, it's just a category, and I try to recommend some books within that category. So the books that I will be talking about today are books that I have really enjoyed for in different ways and in different aspects. But what we will be focusing on today is fast paced books. I don't know about you, but I am a kind of reader who really enjoys quiet, slow burning novels, in particular, books that really allow you to be immersed and just inhabit a world, and those kind of slow, very atmospheric books that take their time. Those are reading experiences that I really treasure. However, there's something to be said about fast paced books that just hook you from the opening lines sometimes of the book, or from the opening paragraph, the first chapter you read, and you just can't let it go, and you are just completely glued to the book until you are done. And that is a kind of experience that I think only reading can really do, even though some other media like TV shows, especially, binge culture, tries to emulate, some more successfully than others. But I feel like there's something that, particularly when people grow up as readers, we get a lot of delight from those experiences. They are really wonderful. And speaking for myself, I can certainly identify that something that has made me become a reader, like something that has made me include reader as part of my identity, is having had those experiences from early childhood. Those experiences of just opening up a book and just realizing that you don't want to go anywhere. You just want to stay there, and you need to know what happens. You need to spend time within those pages or with that particular authorial voice, and you're just there. So, what I will be talking about today are some books that have given me some sort of fast paced experience. These are books that are immersive, but that are very fast paced. Books that just keep you turning the page until you are done. So, I will try to not ramble a lot, and so let's just get started. So, my first recommendation for a really fast paced book is actually in Spanish. I'm sorry if you cannot find this in English. I'm sorry, but this is just such a great book that I wanted to recommend in case you are able to read it in Spanish. This is El Clan de la Loba by Maite Carranza. It is young adult fantasy, but it's the good kind of young adult fantasy. It's atmospheric, it's gloomy, it's so mysterious, and it's one of those experiences that I had when I was like 11 or 12, and I could not stop reading. It's wonderful. And the good thing about this is that if you enjoy this, it's a trilogy, so you still have two more installments. My second recommendation is actually quite more literary and adult and cerebral, but it's just so much fun and so fast paced, in my opinion. And this is Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. This was his first novel after writing amazing short stories for most of his career. And this book is written in such a way, it's the writing is very, very sharp and very, it has like a rhythm that creates a really forward, like propelling rhythm. And it's a book that you can read very, very quickly. I read it in like 2 days. But it's a book that allows so much interpretation, and I think it's an incredibly difficult work in terms of, I think it's a very sophisticated novel. and it's a book that you can read sort of on the surface, but if you really want to dive deeply into it, I think this will be very rewarding. Next up, I have The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne, a novel that many readers don't like, but some others really like it. I really like it. I think there is a very particular tone in this book that I haven't really found anywhere else. It's sort of absurdist and satirical. It's also very melodramatic and heartfelt. But that's not the point. The point is that this book, even though it is a chunkster, a whopping 600 pages long almost, it is so fast paced and so freaking readable. I think this is a great book for people who are experiencing reading slumps, because there's a very cheesy melodramatic storyline or several storylines, but the writing feels so charming. If you can get on with it, not every reader will find it compelling, but if you do find it compelling, this will be a book that you will devour in just a couple of sittings, despite its length. Going back to my childhood, or my young adult years rather, Catching Fire, which is the second book in the Hunger Games trilogy by Suzanne Collins. I guess you could fit the entire trilogy in here, in this, like I'm mentioning the entire trilogy here. But it was really this book, the second one, that I remember having that experience with, having that experience of opening the book and not standing up from the couch until I was done. Another book that I read in my childhood, I was actually very young to be reading Stephen King, but I was just doing my thing. I was very, very young reading Stephen King, and this is one of the first ones that I ever read, The Eyes of the Dragon. This is my Spanish copy. And I really don't know what it was about this book, but it just gripped me. I remember reading this book furiously. Like, furiously, I mean, with that kind of adrenaline rush, just needing to know what happened. It was so action packed and adventurous and plotty. I just remember loving this book. I could not tell you what it's about anymore. I have completely erased it from my memory. But I do remember the feeling of just gushing over this book and just flipping the pages furiously. The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. Yes, I know that it might sound weird to include Donna Tartt, who is a very literary, sort of atmosphere-driven writer, as Donna Tartt in this list. She's one of my favorite writers. All of her 3 novels are 5-star books for me personally. And The Goldfinch, in my opinion, is the most readable and the most accessible of her works. I think this is where people should start with Donna Tartt. And the reason why I am mentioning this in this video is because there is something about the writing, the storytelling, that Donna Tartt uses, or the way that she tells a story, that I found myself just completely glued to the page. And the last time that I read this book, that I reread this book, I read it in like 3 or 4 days. And this is a long novel, and it was a Pulitzer Prize winning novel, so it's a heavy novel in many regards. It's philosophical, it's a little meandering sometimes, but there's something about the way that she spins a yarn. You just feel like you are in a I don't know, like you're in just one track, and I don't know how to explain it. It's one of those reading experiences that I really appreciate, and I think I will appreciate forever, because she manages to use this really beautiful language and complicated ideas and language, and still it's one of the most fun reading experiences that I've had. Of course, I have to include a thriller or a mystery novel in this list, and I think the most engrossing book that I have read in the last 10 years is this one. Joel Dicker's novel, The Truth About the Harry Caber Affair. This is a crime noir thriller mystery novel. It's about a writer who finds himself in the middle of this mystery. It's so complicated, but it's so simple at the same time. It's a long book. It's like well over 500 pages. Yeah, it's almost it's 650 pages in this edition, so it's a long book. I read this in 2 days, and those were 2 days that I couldn't even breathe. I couldn't think of anything else besides this book. The storytelling is superb, the story is wonderful. You are so hooked. I found myself completely glued to the page. Less by Andrew Sean Greer is another Pulitzer Prize winning novel. This one is actually very short, unlike The Goldfinch. And this is just a perfect book. This is a perfect book, and it's a book that I am constantly recommending to people, especially people who don't necessarily love reading or don't make reading part of their routine, or they just don't have the habit of reading and they want to read something light, something that won't be overly intimidating or long or heavy. So I always recommend this one. This one is following Arthur Less. And he's a writer, he's a homosexual man in his 50s. I think he's about to turn 50. And he finds himself in a place in his life, um, which, I won't spoil it, but eventually he goes on vacation. And we follow him in this book as he goes on a world tour. He goes to many different places in the world. He comes to Mexico City, which I really loved reading about that part of the book because, he's here in Mexico City, my hometown. He goes many places. And the reason why I thought this book was so fast paced is because the writing is very light. It seems very simple, but I don't think it's simple at all. I think it's deceptively simple. I think that he's a writer of great talent, Andrew Sean Greer, and he manages to do something fairly complex and fairly sophisticated with very simple writing and dialogue and ideas. Very funny book. It's hilarious, it's charming, and it's also incredibly heartwarming and emotional. It's one of those perfect books for me, and it will put you under its spell. Normal People by Sally Rooney is another book that I thought did something fairly sophisticated, not as much as Less. I think Less is a far superior book. Normal People for me was a 3-star book, I think 3.5 stars. I liked it. I think it was impressive in many regards. It's not a book that I loved, but I do think that firstly, it is very fast paced. It's very easy to get hooked into because the writing is very minimalistic, very simple. The dialogue is written in a way that just it's like a flow of speech. The whole book is actually written like a flow of speech and a great selection of scenes and dialogue that make for a very compelling reading experience and a reading experience that you can't put down. Again, I think this is a very simple book on the outside, but it actually is doing more things beneath the surface. I think that's a great way to say it. This is another book that I think would be a great recommendation for people who are not really dedicated to reading. I think this might be entertaining enough, but also give them food for thought, and hopefully it will hook them into reading a more sophisticated, more mature reading material. And finally, yes, I have to mention Dan Brown. Um, Dan Brown is an author that many people here in many reading forums don't take seriously, and I can totally see why. He's the definition of a best-selling author. He's the definition of an author who just goes for plot and story and storytelling, and the characters are ridiculous. The stories themselves are bonkers. The style is very pulpy and yeah, these books are just fun. And I do find that many people can be very dismissive about this kind of thing. He has a very particular shtick, and that's fine. Personally, I can tell you that Dan Brown is, in many ways, responsible for my becoming a reader, not a reader, but an avid reader, a reader that is always reading a book. There's not a single day in my life that I am not reading a book or many books. And that's partly because I found so much pleasure and satisfaction reading Dan Brown when I was a child. I actually read The Da Vinci Code, which was the first one I read. It's not the first one in the series in chronological order, but it's the first one that I read, and I read it when I was around 11 years old, and I was hooked. I mean, I that's an experience that I will never forget. Even though the Da Vinci Code can be ridiculous and bonkers and preposterous, and we can discuss about we can discuss that book for all its flaws, but there's something about that book for me in my personal history that really hooked me into reading. Um, by that point in my life, I was used to reading Harry Potter, historic materials, the Chronicles of Narnia, a series of unfortunate events, etc., etc. And then I read the Da Vinci Code, and I found an altogether different experience and very thrilling. Um, so after reading the Da Vinci Code, I read all of his books very, very quickly, and all of them have been, well, all of them except the last one that he came out with a couple of years ago, Origin, which I think it's the worst one. Um, well, that one and Inferno, those are very, very bad books. But the rest of his books are just so good for what they are. They do what they do what they set out to do. So I have some recommendations: Angels and Demons, um, Digital Fortress. This is one of those that I read when I was like 12. And I remember losing sleep because this book was so good, and I locked myself up in the bathroom and I just finished this in one night. This is a little bit like 24, the series with what's his name? Well, Jack Bauer, you know. And this other one is Deception Point, which is also incredibly fun. And again, this is another book that I slept, that I lost sleep over. Um, so yeah, say what you will about Dan Brown, but he writes some damn entertaining fast-paced novels. Those are some of my recommendations for today for fast-paced books. I hope you can pick up some recommendations from this video, something that will entertain you. And please leave your comments down below telling me what are some of your favorite fast-paced experiences or some of those books that you have just read compulsively.